Welcome to the Rum Ration Podcast, where military history is brought to life by former soldiers who love the past.
So, welcome to the Rum Ration, where history comes alive, sometimes in mud, sometimes in glory, and sometimes in an unexpected Christmas truce. Hi, I'm Rejoy Chatterjee.
And I'm Colin Robinson, and today we're unwrapping, because it's Christmas, one of the most heartwarming and unlikely stories from World War I. Yep, the Christmas Truce of 1914.
Yeah, and it's really appropriate for this time of year, right? I mean, Christmas around the corner. And this is a heartwarming story of carols, camaraderie, and a little bit of football, or soccer, if you call it, in no man's land. It's just lucky for the guys that FIFA wasn't around in those days. I mean, if they heard about this game, I think they would have dived in for the licensing rights and penalty fines and all sorts of things.
Brought in some slave labor to build the arena. Yeah, if the ball didn't deflate on barbed wire, I'd kind of call it a win, right? So let's set the stage for this miraculous event, Rejoy. Where are we in December 1914?
Okay, so the war has been going on for about 5 months now, sparked off by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, which happened at the end of June 1914, and by end of July 28th, 1914, the war broke out. And it's been something that none of the European powers could have ever imagined at all possible, because Europe was divided up into two camps at that time. You've got the Triple Entente, which was Russia, Great Britain, and France. And then you've got the Central Powers, essentially Austro-Hungary. I can't believe it's gone.
Serbia.
Germany. So Serbia was on our side.
Right, and you've got the Allied powers on the other side, right? Britain, France, Russia, although they're not friends today, and they hadn't been friends earlier the previous century when they were fighting in Crimea. It's amazing how everything that's old becomes new again, right? But so you had Britain, France, and Russia facing off against the Central Powers, which was led primarily by Germany and Austro-Hungary. And everyone thought it'd be a quick war, right? A few months of action, and then everyone's going to be home for Christmas.
Absolutely, and that's the last thing that happened. I mean, it got kicked off with the War of Frontiers. Well, they called the War of Frontiers because it was at that time in 1914. It was still a war of movement. It wasn't the type of war that we all have become accustomed to hearing about, the First World War. The Germans invaded France via Belgium following the Schlieffen Plan, named after the Chief of Staff shortly before he died. And the French countered with their imaginatively named Plan 17, which is...
Not Plan 16.
No, and not Plan 15. It was the 17th version of the same plan, which called for the French going right into Alsace-Lorraine, ignoring the German sweep through Belgium and northern France, because they wanted Alsace-Lorraine back, which I can fully understand because the highest number of Michelin-starred restaurants is in the Alsace-Lorraine region. So that's what they did, and they were catastrophically ejected with massive casualties. The British plan was basically asking the French, tell us where you want us. They were very much at that time the junior partners in that relationship. Yeah, the Battle of the Frontiers, which were the opening battles, where the British first came into contact with the Germans at the Battle of Mons, where they stopped them for a day, again inflicting massive casualties, but also suffering massive casualties.
Yeah, speaking of these massive casualties, I think that's something that's overlooked. I think people's perception of World War I is it kind of started off slowly. They know about the assassination of the Archduke, and then there was, the mass mobilizations. But I don't think people really understood just how much death was brought about in such a short period of time. Because we like to think of our minds are drawn towards like Verdun, the Somme, some of the massive battles on the Eastern Front. Passchendaele, as big grinding slaughters. But do we know how many men had been killed already by December 1940, just slightly less than 5 months of fighting?
Well, we have a bit of an idea, and thank you for cutting off my rambling and bringing me back on track, because that's a whole other episode. So there are estimates, of course, and we're talking about, let's say, from the beginning of August till December 24th, 1914, anywhere from 900,000 to 1 million soldiers killed across all fronts. And that's killed. That's
not casualties.
Not casualties, actually killed. It's unbelievable. You've had all the battles on the Western Front, and of course there were the Eastern Front battles as well. So you've got the Russians at Tannenberg, you've got the first battle of the Masurian Lakes, you've got the Serbian Front as well, where there's not very much information about what was going on there. But what we do know is incredible numbers of soldiers were being killed in the Austro-Hungarian army and the Serbian army as well. Upwards of, they say, about 130,000 or so, they think. So Yeah, it was a pretty grim time. Not at all anything like what's been experienced before or since. When you think about what's going on, and now it's Christmas time, and you volunteered or you've been called up, conscripted, and you're thinking, uh, it's a bit of an adventure, a bit of a lark. I'm going to go see what happens and get home for Christmas, type of thing. And now you're stuck in this freezing, very rudimentary trench, because these are not the trenches that we're used to from 1916, 1917 with dugouts and some sort of creature comforts. Nothing at all. Wet, cold, rainy, miserable. Not exactly silent night. It was a really grim and miserable time for all of them.
Perfect time to maybe talk about a sponsor.
Now it's time for our Wish We Had a Sponsor break.
Yes, our favorite segment, the We Wish We Had a Sponsor. And today's We Wish We Had a Sponsor segment is brought to you by F3 Connect. Go to f3connect.com, particularly if you're in the real estate market in Montreal. It's an all-in-one real estate sales and marketing solution that provides exclusive real estate leads in your area. It has lead funnels, follow-up, appointments, all the tools you need to grow your business in one place, from paid advertising, lead generation, appointment setting, follow-up, missed call text back, and CRM management. It's all in one spot. Go to f3connect.com today. Welcome back to the Rum Ration. So it's Christmas Eve 1914, and on parts of the Western Front, the gunfire starts to die down. And a British soldier, Rifleman Graham Williams of the London Rifle Brigade, later wrote about this moment. He said, quote, "Suddenly, lights began to appear along the German parapet, which were evidently makeshift Christmas trees adorned with lighted candles. And then they started singing Stille Nacht. It was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever experienced." Yeah, I believe it there, Rifleman Williams. German troops started decorating the trenches with candles and makeshift Christmas trees. Like the makeshift Christmas trees, maybe, some little bit of camo concealment. But candles? That's like just begging for the Brits to start taking shots at you. I mean, everyone knows about the third man dead on a match was always talked about from lighting a cigarette and how dangerous it is to show a light at night. And here the Germans were on Christmas Eve lighting candles on Christmas trees.
Well, I'm impressed that he pronounced it as Stille Nacht.
Well, he wrote it. I don't know if he pronounced it.
So Stille Nacht is Silent Night, of course, and one of the oldest and most beloved Christmas carols. But I don't think the Brits sang it as Stille Nacht. They probably responded with Silent Night, and it started off that way. So, the big question is, how did this truce actually come into fruition? So it's exactly as you said. The Germans started decorating their trenches, started singing Stille Nacht, and the Brits took up the challenge and started getting into it as well.
Right. So the Brits, they start responding with their own carols. Eh? And I guess in future episodes, when you're writing the script, maybe you should give the German stuff for you, seeing that you lived there for 15 years and speak German fluently. But the Brits did start responding, right? It became like a back and forth, a caroling battle, if you will.
Well, these are two very competitive sites, and anybody who follows, say, football or soccer would also attest to that. I mean, the Brits and the Germans have been going at it for centuries, really. And, well, if we're not shooting at each other, let's sing at each other, And then, interesting enough, as they're singing to each other, essentially, like having a sing-off, one British soldier decided he was going to crawl out into no man's land and see what was going on. And that was Corporal John Ferguson. And his take on it, which he's written down, was he said, quote, "We met the Germans halfway. They seemed as glad to meet us as we were to meet them. We shook hands, exchanged souvenirs, and wished each other a Merry Christmas." An amazing moment. When you think about it, just a little while ago, you have these two sides trying to kill each other in the most brutal ways possible. And now they're milling about in no man's land, shaking hands, exchanging gifts, cigarettes and chocolate, and basically commiserating over their shared experience.
Yeah, and from the German side, Lieutenant, or I guess Leutnant, Johannes Neumann described it vividly, quote, "I grabbed my binoculars." I don't have a good German accent. "I grabbed my binoculars and looking cautiously over the parapet, saw the incredible sight of our soldiers exchanging cigarettes, schnapps, and chocolate with the enemy. It was surreal. Men, as Rejoy mentioned, that men had been shooting at each other and throwing grenades at each other just hours before. We're now sharing cigars out in the open." And one account even mentions a German soldier offering a British soldier a haircut. That's some serious dedication to tidiness in the trenches and some serious trust in having a dude who you were previously trying to murder hold a pair of sharp scissors near your neck. I'm not sure I'd be going that far.
It's also some serious German accent
Yeah, thank you.
put on
Thank
over
you.
there.
Yes.
I felt
I gave up, as you
I
could tell,
felt I felt I was right there, you know.
in the
And
moment.
in the moment, talking to Lieutenant Johannes Niemann, and in the midst of it all, I must say, very impressive there. So to get on with the just the way this was kind of unfolding, it started with the gifts. Started with the exchanging of cigarettes and cigars, and then they decided they were going to have a little kickabout in no man's land, which is always a great idea. And of course, in keeping with the British tradition and the British standard, they decided to say next call wins before anything further could happen. So we don't actually have the statistics, and please, FIFA, do not call us about that because we will not be able to provide you with that information, and we're not willing to give you money in order to talk about it either. So with that, now we're going to move on to a message from our fantasy sponsor.
And who's your fantasy sponsor today, Rejoy?
Well, it's always Pusser's Rum to begin with.
Naturally.
For so many reasons, not just the fact that they make fabulous rum, which we're always happy to sample, of course, but I love the name as well. Do you know where the name Pusser's Rum comes from, Colin?
I do. Why don't you explain it to? It comes from the name. It's basically a mispronunciation of a role or a title or of a job description of somebody on a ship in the Royal Navy. So why don't you describe who that was?
That was the purser. And originally, it was the purser that came around handing out the original rum ration, the tot of rum. So everyone began to really love the purser. And the high standard of education among regular sailors in 1655, 1670 led to, of course, the pronunciation of pusser.
I think you're taking the love of the purser a bit far. I think the purser was hated and reviled because he charged everyone for everything. Now, the fact that he was in charge of the rum may have mitigated some of that, but you couldn't get off a ship without having settled your accounts for things that you had bought, like, extra food, a sailcloth to repair your damaged clothes, all that stuff, without settling with the purser. But you're absolutely right. That's how the origin of Pusser rum came about, which was started to really bring back the whole after the Black Tot Day, when that was the last rum ration ever served in the Royal Navy in 1970, and continuing it. So visit pussersrum.com and tell them to start sponsoring us.
Exactly.
Back to the show.
And it's nice to be loved for 30 seconds, and even if you're hated for the rest of the time, isn't it? So we were discussing the Christmas Truce a little bit. So Colin, why don't you expand a little bit more on how it actually, sadly, came to an end?
That's right. Welcome back to the Rum Ration, everybody. And before the break, we were discussing the Christmas truce and wondering how long could this peace break it could last. And sadly, of course, the truce didn't last very long. By Boxing Day, which would be the 26th of December, for those who are not in the Commonwealth tradition, most of the fraternization was over. And one British soldier, Lieutenant Charles Brock, wrote in his journal, quote, "It was with heavy hearts that we returned to our trenches. The men had tasted peace, however brief, and it made the war seem all the more cruel." This somber sentiment was echoed across the front as hostilities resumed. Officers on both sides weren't exactly thrilled about their soldiers mingling with the enemy because they were concerned that they started making these bonds, it would be more difficult for them to pull the trigger on each other the next time.
Very true. I mean, one moment when you're handing out chocolate and cigarettes and candies and engaging in playing a little bit of football, how can you really be expected to go back to trying to bayonet that guy next time around? That's unbelievable. However, there were some German soldiers who weren't particularly happy about the truce.
Really?
Didn't find it at all to be the right thing to do. A soldier in particular has gone on the record of saying, "Now let me give this a shot. Such a thing should not happen in wartime. Have you no German sense of honor left?" Take a wild guess who that particular soldier.
Technically not a German soldier, correct?
Technically not a German soldier.
Why don't you, and I believe around the age 25 years?
That is absolutely correct, Colin.
Renowned painter of watercolors in Vienna?
Yes, he was, and he also sported a very dashing mustache.
Yes, I had a future career in politics that burned rather brightly for a short time, and then
burned very brightly.
Spectacular. Yeah, who would that be?
None other than the famous Adolf Hitler.
Oh, what a piece of shit. Orders came down on both sides to restart the hostilities, and apparently some of the generals were actually quite spooked. They were very worried that the soldiers would not start shooting after they had gone off and realized that there was humans on each side, and it would be a lot harder to kill them. Some places fighting resumed almost reluctantly, and let's not forget that the truce wasn't everywhere; it wasn't across the entire line. I
That's
think
right.
shooting had kind of stopped, but the visits across the line wasn't widespread everywhere. But soldiers who'd shared cigars that day, we're now back to shooting at each other. It's heartbreaking when you think about it.
Absolutely. And another interesting point is that this truce was really between the Germans and the British. There have been some questions about whether it extended to, as you said, it wasn't all across the line, but they're extended to the French as well, if the French did the same thing. And there's no real evidence that the French army participated in this truce for understandable reasons. It's their country. They had been invaded. There were still memories of the War of 1870, where they lost the provinces of Alsace-Lorraine. So there was a great deal of bitterness on the French side. They weren't particularly interested, for the most part, in 1914 of engaging in a truce. As far as they saw it, they had a holy mission to throw the Germans back out and teach them a bloody good lesson. So no, they didn't really take part on it. But, sadly, in later years, there were small truces here and there, but nothing like this on this scale. In fact, the war just grew more brutal.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to visit the spot where the truce, where the famous football match happened. There's a memorial there now and an interpretive center. It's near one of the larger Commonwealth Grave Commission grave sites, and it's really really well done. And it's a sobering moment to try and think that basic humanity still can kind of shine through. That I'm not sure if it's because the mass media wasn't there, so people perhaps around the world weren't aware of the total cost that had already happened by that point. The numbers that you gave at the start of this podcast are just numbing. 900,000 to a million dead. And
Unbelievable.
that means there's probably another 3 to 4 times as many who've been wounded. And this is before gas warfare had started, before the mass artillery had started. This is, it was just, I can't believe it.
And those are estimates only as well.
Estimates, exactly. So what do we make of the Christmas truce today? Was it a fleeting moment of humanity? Was it a protest against the war?
Well, I think I'd say it's a bit of both. When you're in that sort of a situation, and remember, a lot of these soldiers were conscripts and called up reservists, not professional soldiers. In the British Army, that was the only army that was different. That was a fully professional army, the only professional army of its day, and of course, because of that, relatively small in comparison to the other armies. And it's sobering to think that by the middle of 1915, that army, called by the Kaiser the Old Contemptibles, or the Contemptible Little Army, they in fact called
They called
themselves
themselves the Old
Old
Yeah.
Contemptibles, no longer existed. They were all gone. So, yeah, a fleeting moment of humanity and maybe just trying to put a little bit of the horror behind them for a little while. I mean, it's like what we said in our first episode about the tot of rum. You've got that little bit of a brief respite from the chaos around you, and maybe this was a form of trying to expand that a little bit. Just a lot of men, tired, hungry, cold, terrified, longing for peace and longing to get home again.
Yeah. It's also a story, I guess, of what could have been a glimpse of a world where understanding triumphs over conflict. And as historian Stanley Weintraub wrote, and I quote, "The Christmas truce was not a step toward peace, but it showed that even amidst war, humanity endures." End quote. So that really is a legacy that continues to inspire us to find some common ground in unlikely places. I mean, if you could share a cigarette and boot around a football in no man's land, maybe there's some hope for the rest of us.
And it really is an inspiring moment because it still resonates today. There have been media depictions about the Christmas truce. Some of my favorites are Joyeux Noël, which is a movie that really captures the spirit of what happened there and this spontaneous outpouring of goodwill. I mean, one of the things we talk about at Christmas, you say goodwill to all men. That really, but people rarely practice it, but here you actually see them practicing it. And the British chain Sainsbury's in 1914 put out an ad where they focused on soldiers exchanging gifts and the camaraderie around that time. And it was an ad that was timed for Christmas in that year, and it did phenomenally well. And people still watch it today just to try and get a little bit of that feeling.
Yeah, we'll have links to those that you've listed on the website rumration.ca in the blog notes.
So I think on that note, it's time to wrap up. And from all of us here at Rum Ration, the Rum Ration podcast, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and all the very best for the next year.
Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and tell your friends about the Rum Ration. And as always, cheers to history.
Cheers to history. And just before we leave, one last note. If you've got any questions, comments, please feel free to send those to us. We're happy to try and answer as many as possible. And of course, if you volunteer to sponsor us, we're happy to take that as well. So,
Rachel, speaking of, I'll kick us off with the first question. I can't help but notice we seem to be missing one podcast participant who was very popular according to user reviews on the last episode. Do you know what has happened to that?
yes, my cat McCavity. Well, McCavity, or Mackie as we call him here, disgraced himself in that last
You called him a son of
episode.
a bitch. That wasn't really nice. That's on record.
That actually was not Mackie. That was our other cat, Newton, who's a bit of a diva and insisted. He had some last minute notes for the podcast, and he felt the lighting was not correct. And he's a very opinionated chap, so he had to be told to back off.
Creative direction at its best.
At its best.
All right, send us in your questions, folks.
Looking forward to it.
All right, you want me to stop recording?